Well, good afternoon, folks. Glad to see so many out on such a beautiful day. Everybody else is out bathing, I understand. Went to the beach. Hello, everybody. Hey, I'm not bashful. We have a friend, I started saying old friend, but she's really not that old, but a friend. If you ate in the dining room pre-COVID, you probably saw her often. She was the hostess, among other things. Yeah. She has several degrees. She may talk to you about them. But she was doing that just to make loose change, I understand. Now she's teaching at Polk Community College. D. Souls, for those who don't know her. D. Souls. D standing for dump. No. What does it stand for? Dorothy. Okay. Anyway, you ready?
I need to turn on my slides and I'll be ready to go.
Okay. So anybody got a good joke? Sam, you got a good joke? Nah. I thought she was ready. Not if you're going to tell it. No, I just... What's your joke?
The sermon this morning is Jesus walked in the water. The sermon tonight is searching for Jesus.
Ooh. No, they didn't hear it, and it's a good thing. Okay, Dee, you've got the floor.
Okay. So thank you for having me. It's such a joy to see you all. I'm glad that you're here. Yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. Thank you for the reminder. I'm ready to set that aside. I don't know how to do that, Gene.
Well, let's see. I think right here.
Oops. This is not working. That should be going back. Jono has got me messed up.
There it is.
Okay.
Well, just I guess me.
Okay. Let's see. So I also want to thank Jean for inviting me to come and speak to you today at the Academy. Our topic is about the early encounters in the Americas. And so we're going to be talking about encounters between Europeans and Native Americans and even some of the first African Americans. Okay, I can do that.
This is pretty good here. Pretty loud. And that's an Enid or somebody named, I won't say who,
Okay. Let's see here. Can you hear me now? Okay, very good. So I hope that some of the stories will be familiar to you and that others will be new and exciting. So let's go along here. By the way, we'll be covering the Spanish conquest of the Americas, followed by the English fort at Jamestown, and also we'll finish up with Plymouth. So we start with Columbus. We begin with Columbus discovering the New World. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. That's how we remember, exactly, how we remember the first of the 4 voyages of Columbus. He was seeking a way to get to India by sailing west. The second voyage was in 1493, when he began to suspect that he had actually arrived in the East Indies after all. He crossed the Atlantic again in 1498 and in 1502, claiming additional territory for Spain. Columbus described the native people he encountered as being naked as the day they were born. And he also noted that they had no weapons and being timid and full of terror. But when they were reassured of their safety, these native people were honest, kind, and generous. It was Columbus's hope that they might become Christians and loyal subjects of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. Jean, do we have the YouTube on? Yes. Okay. So then came the era of the Spanish conquistadors. From 1518 to 1521, Hernando Cortez, one of the Spanish conquistadors, managed to overthrow Montezuma and the Aztec Empire in modern Mexico, along with help from other indigenous people. Some of the people of the New World were peaceful, but others, like the Aztecs, engaged in military conquest and civil wars. They practiced horrific human sacrifice on a massive scale, along with cannibalism as part of their pagan religion. The Spaniards were greatly outnumbered by the Aztecs, but they had horses, guns, armor, and European military training that taught them to fight as a unit. It was a difficult campaign, but the Spaniards ultimately succeeded in no small part due to the spread of smallpox among the Aztecs. After they conquered, the Spaniards attempted to Christianize the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Incas, and other indigenous people of Central and South America. They put a stop to the bloody practices they found there. The Spanish thought to conquer and civilize this hostile new world by the work of both the soldier and the priest. They also enslaved these people and put them to hard labor mining silver, gold, and copper, or working in the fields, harvesting cash crops like sugarcane on plantations. The Aztecs themselves had enslaved and brutalized other tribal groups. So it's hard to imagine they expected anything different when they were conquered by the Europeans. Oh, it advanced on me. Let's see. And yes, so we're here. In the 1530s, one Dominican priest, Father Luis, took a different approach in Central America. There in the mountains of Guatemala, he mastered the Quechua language and organized a team of native Christian peddlers to sing the story about Jesus in the native style to appeal to the aggressive, warlike tribes living there. Their leaders were moved by the simple story of redemption, and they sent for the priest to come and teach them more. The people converted so completely that the Spanish changed the name of the place from the land of war to the land of true peace, or Verapaz, as it's still called today. Sadly, this same priest tried to take the same kinder, gentler approach to Florida in 1547 and failed. Instead of reaching the east coast of Florida, as he had planned, Father Luis was sent to the same Gulf Coast region where Hernando de Soto had previously landed about 10 years earlier with more than 500 soldiers. These native people just south of Tampa Bay wasted no time clubbing to death the gentle, the gentle priest and his followers. Oh, there we go. The Spanish considered La Florida to cover a region much larger than the state of Florida is today. It extended all the way up to Delaware Bay. About 1561, a Spanish ship had been blown off course in a storm and ended up in the Chesapeake Bay region, which they named Bahia de Santa Maria, or the Bay of St. Mary. That's where we begin the story of a Native American called Paque He would be known as Don Luis, and then later, as the story continues, we'll find him using another name. Near the Chesapeake Bay area of modern Virginia, the Spaniards managed to lure two young native men on board their ship and took them away to Spain. Kidnapping boys or young men was a common practice among the Spanish, who would train these captives to serve as interpreters. One of these young men was Paque Quineo. However, the Spanish believed he was a person of some importance, a son of a chief.
When they arrived in Portugal,
When they arrived in Portugal, the captain requested 50 ducats to outfit this princely person in attire suitable to appear at court. They traveled to Madrid, which was the new capital of Spain, and Paquiquineo was presented to King Philip II. The king ordered that Paquiquineo would join a Dominican mission to his homeland of Ajucan. On what was supposed to be a brief stopover in Mexico, Paquiquineo became deathly ill. He had resisted conversion up to this point, but believing he was about to die, he consented to being baptized and was named Don Luis. Surprisingly, he did not die, but Don Luis, as he was now called, recovered his health. After years of delay, a new mission to Ajucan was planned that would include 50 soldiers and 2 priests. In all of his travels and living among the Spaniards, Don Luis had seen domination of native people in Mexico, in Havana, Cuba, and other places. He gave them full cooperation to get back home, but he surely had no intention of letting Spanish domination happen to his own people. So he was unable to locate Ajucan when they were nearby around modern-day North Carolina. The ship had to return to Spain. Once more, in 1570, another trip was planned by a small group of Jesuits to peacefully convert the Indians of Ajucan with no military escort. Their group included Don Luis, 5 Jesuit priests, and 3 novices who were to teach catechism, and 1 altar boy.
when they arrived in
Use the other mic, we can hear you better with that.
They arrived in September. This one here? This is better? Okay. Should I try both? No? Okay. I'll try. Okay. How about now? Is this better? Okay. They arrived in September of 1570 to a warm welcome. One of these missionaries wrote that the Indians seemed to think Don Luis had risen from the dead and come down from heaven. They reported that there had been 6 years of famine among the native people who remained, they expected to perish from hunger and cold in the coming winter. Don Luis initially helped the Jesuits, but after a few days he returned to his own people and his native customs. This left the priests without an interpreter to represent them in their need for food. They also noted with disgust that he had taken up with women. Several months later, in February, Don Luis returned and massacred the weak and starving priests, sparing only the altar boy, Alonso. When a Spanish ship came that spring, it became apparent that something had gone very wrong with this attempted mission. There was no message sent to the ship from the priests, and Indians were seen on the shore wearing the Jesuit robes. 2 years later, they returned and captured several Indians as hostages. They demanded that Don Luis and the altar boy Alonso be brought out to them. Alonso was returned, and he told his rescuers the full story. But Don Luis had disappeared. They baptized the Indian hostages and then hung them from the ship in retribution. After that, they left the region for good. But some people believe that Don Luis showed up again more than 30 years later and under a different name. Incidentally, name changes might seem a bit confusing, but it was common practice for Native Americans to change their name from time to time based on life experiences and accomplishments. Okay, and that brings us to Jamestown, where the English established a settlement in 1607. These are reproductions of buildings within the Jamestown fort. The fort itself was in the shape of a triangle. The land where the English chose to build the fort gave them a solidly defensible position with excellent view of the river to guard against possible attack by the Spanish, which never came. However, there was no drinkable water in this area a good part of the year. The river water would become brackish, and the water in the swamp behind them contained arsenic. This was just one of the many problems the English would face in this new environment. But against all odds, some of them managed to survive, with occasional help from the native people and even less frequent help from England. These are reproductions of Powhatan Longhouses called Yehaken. They were usually constructed by women, and the houses belonged to them rather than to the men, which just makes so much sense. If the man of the house didn't do his part to provide meat by hunting and fishing, he could be kicked out. Yehaken were constructed by bending sapling trees and fastening them in place to form a framework, and then covering the frame with woven mats and sheets of birch bark. The women also grew corn, squash, and beans. When the land around them became depleted, they could deconstruct their homes and move the village to another location. Opechancanough was the uncle of Pocahontas. He was chief of one of the tribes in the Powhatan Confederation. He's pictured here in a struggle with John Smith. You can see how tall he was compared to Smith. John Smith was a little bit shorter than the average Englishman of his day, but only by a couple of inches. Opechancanough was known for being a cunning and fierce warrior, capable of great deception, who despised Europeans. Some people, myself included, believe he was, in fact, Don Luis, who had returned home to his people more than 30 years before. So we'll take a moment to talk about the story of Pocahontas. There are different views on whether the story of Pocahontas saving John Smith's life is true or something that Smith made up. We can be certain that John Smith knew Pocahontas when she was a young girl, about 10 to 12 years old. She was the favorite daughter of Powhatan Seneca. He was better known to us as Chief Powhatan. We know that in 1608, Pocahontas assisted in taking food to Jamestown to persuade John Smith to release some Indian prisoners who were there. Then John Smith returned to England in 1609. About 4 or 5 years later, Pocahontas was kidnapped and held for a ransom demand of food, the release of English prisoners, and the return of stolen weapons. The exchange didn't take place, and she was moved to an English settlement. There she learned to speak English, converted to Christianity, and took the English name Rebecca. John Rolfe, a widower, requested permission from Governor Dale for them to be married. The wedding took place in 1614. Her uncle, Opechancanough, came to their wedding with a gift from her father, a necklace of fine pearls suitable for royalty. With the marriage, peace was established between the English and the Indians. The next year, Pocahontas gave birth to a son, Thomas Rolfe. The following year, the Rolfe family went to England with an entourage that included other Native Americans. There, Pocahontas enjoyed celebrity status, and they were the center of attention in society. When it came time to return home, there was a delay due to unfavorable tides. Pocahontas sat down to dinner with her husband and the ship's captain and became immediately ill. She died within 24 hours of sweating sickness. Her son Thomas also became ill, but he recovered. This was not uncommon at the time in England, but to her people, it appeared as if she had been poisoned. That's how they reported it. John Rolfe returned to Virginia without Pocahontas or their son. Within the next year of 1618, Pocahontas' father, Powhatan Seneca, died, no doubt heartbroken over the loss of his daughter. John Rolfe remarried the same year and began to prosper, growing tobacco. But Pocahontas' uncle, Opechancanough, remained and increased his influence over his own people. We're following a timeline, so we're going to take a brief detour at this point to talk about the first Africans to reach Jamestown in 1619. This has gotten a lot of attention recently, but only part of the story is being told. I'm going to try and fill in some gaps. In the early 1600s, the Portuguese were exporting thousands of slaves from the coast of West Africa. Some 350 of these Africans were loaded onto a ship bound for Veracruz, Mexico. This ship, the San Juan Bautista, was intercepted by two English privateer ships, the White Lion and the Treasurer. Privateer is another name for pirates. And what do pirates do? Take all you can, give nothing back. The English pirates took more than 20 people from this human cargo and then landed at Port Comfort near Jamestown. They offered to trade the African people for food, which they were desperately in need of. Well, obviously some deal was struck because the people stayed and the ships left. History doesn't record what happened to most of these African people, but we do know a bit about a few of them. They had arrived in the colony without any means to provide for their own food, clothing, or shelter. It's likely they were treated as other indentured servants in this period, expected to work off a debt of 7 years. One couple from the pirate ships, known as Anthony and Isabella, lived in the household of a Virginian named William Tucker. When Isabella gave birth to a son, she and Anthony named him after William Tucker. He was the first African born in the colonies, and he was a free person, not a slave. We also know of another woman from the pirate ships named Angelo. In 1625, she was in the household of William Pierce. We don't know her exact status, but this would have been about year 6 in a standard 7-year contract for an indentured servant. For these 3 people, Anthony, Isabella, and Angelo, there's no evidence that they were enslaved or mistreated. At some point, slavery became a reprehensible part of our country's history, and a civil war was fought to bring it to an end. But slavery in America doesn't appear to have started in 1619 or in Jamestown. This map shows the destination of enslaved Africans in Atlantic slave trade. You'll notice that only 4% of African slaves were transported to the North American British colonies that later became the United States. The vast majority, a total of 94%, were sent to the Caribbean, to Brazil, and to Central America. This is a very different perception from what most people have about where African slaves landed in the New World. And now we pick up the story we started about Paquequeneo, who became known as Don Luis, who disappeared after the massacre of some Spanish priests. He reemerged in history as the uncle of Pocahontas, known as Opechancanough. Opechancanough now had become paramount chief, and after the death of Pocahontas, he no longer had any reason to keep the peace with the English. Opechancanough organized a large-scale assault on the English that was carried out on March 22, 1622, killing 347 colonists and destroying their crops. Some women were taken as hostages. Many more colonists would perish that year from hunger. The Indians did not feel the need to finish them off because they believed those who remained would flee from the colony and return to England. They did not expect the retribution that would follow. In hostage negotiations, the English gave poisoned wine to the Indians, killing 200 of them and sickening another 50 who they also killed. Opechancanough was among the poisoned, but he survived. More than 20 years went by. The English continued to come to the colony, taking up more and more land. In 1644, Opechancanough planned and carried out another large-scale massacre, this time killing around 500 colonists. This is a significant number, but by now it represented only about 10% of the colonists. Opochenkono was very old by this point. He had to be carried on a litter. Still, it took the English another 2 years to capture him and put him in jail, where he was shot in the back by one of his guards. They say he was around 100 years old. That would fit with the time frame of Pacuequineo or Don Luis. A new era in leadership had dawned among the Native Americans in Virginia. They had a new paramount chief, a woman. Her name was Kokakowski. She was the widow of the previous paramount chief, Totopotomoy, who had died tragically and heroically in battle, along with 100 of his Indian warriors. They were fighting on the side of the British against a hostile invading Indian tribe called the Rickahockins. Kokakowski was the daughter of Opochenkono, but she and her husband were both Christian converts, and they were both very clear about their peaceful intentions towards the English colonists. Reservations for the tribes had been established in 1646, and strict English laws were in place to try and keep a peace based on separation between the Indians and the English. Kokakowski was given the title Queen of the Pamunkey by the English, the Pamunkey being the central leadership tribe of the Powhatan Confederation, the tribe that Pocahontas herself was a part of. Kokakowski was the first cousin of Pocahontas, but Pocahontas had died some 20 years before she was born. The Indians had peaceful intentions towards the English, but not all the English had peaceful intentions towards the Indians. Opinions vary widely on the person and character of Nathaniel Bacon. Some even paint him as a hero and a patriot. In fact, he was neither. He had only been in Jamestown a short time before he stirred up a rebellion. He had a lot of attitude and a strong sense of entitlement. He hated all Indians and endorsed the policy of removing them from the land by any means necessary to allow for colonial expansion. Bacon and the colonists and indentured servants who followed him opposed the more moderate Governor Berkeley. Under Nathaniel Bacon's leadership, they seized control of the government, arrested their opponents, and attacked the tribes of peaceful Indians around them, including the Pamunkey. Kokakowski knew that Nathaniel Bacon and his followers were specifically after her. She did her best to protect her people. She told them not to fire on the English, to leave their belongings, and to flee. She herself separated from them and hid in the Dragon Run swamp. There's a historic marker in the area that reads like this: although the Pamunkey Indians had been allies of the Virginia colonists since 1646, early in 1676, they were driven from their main town on the Pamunkey River by sympathizers of insurrectionist Nathaniel Bacon and took refuge in the Dragon Run swamp. In August, Bacon's forces searched for the tribal leader Kokakowski there. Capturing an old woman identified as her nurse, whom they killed after she deliberately misled them, Bacon then found the Pamunkey and attacked, killing 7 and capturing another 45. Kokakowski escaped into the swamp and hid for 2 weeks, emerging almost starved. The tribe returned to the town after Bacon's death in October. On September 16, 1676, on orders from Nathaniel Bacon, Jamestown was burned to the ground. About 6 weeks later, Bacon died of dysentery. Without Bacon's leadership, the rebellion collapsed. Some of Bacon's most ardent followers, who had burned and looted and killed or enslaved Indians, were brought to trial and hanged for their part in the rebellion. The next year, a treaty was negotiated and signed in Williamsburg, acknowledging and protecting the rights of the peaceful Indian tribes who were subject to the King of England, Charles II. It was an excellently worded treaty, well thought out, and it is still in effect today. Kokakowski was the primary signatory of this treaty, along with chiefs of other Indian tribes. This is the silver frontlet, one of the gifts from Charles II of England to Kokakowski to commemorate the signing of the Treaty of Middle Plantation in Williamsburg, in Virginia, in May of 1677. It's about 4 by 6 inches and was originally fastened to the front of a red velvet cap. The inscription reads, "The Queen of Pamunkey," and it features the coat of arms of King Charles II with the title Charles II, King of England, Scotland, France, Ireland, and Virginia. According to Dr. Ashley Adkins Spivey, director of the Pamunkey Indian Museum and Cultural Center, the Queen of Pamunkey frontlet is an invaluable part of Pamunkey history. It is the physical representation of our last treaty, negotiated with England in 1677, a treaty that has been the cornerstone for upholding our rights over the past 300 years. It is unbelievable that the frontlet survived, and we are honored that this piece of Pamunkey history has made its way back home. We are truly honored by Preservation Virginia's decision to repatriate the frontlet to the Pamunkey Indian tribe. The Pamunkey tribe and the governor of Virginia have continued all this time to maintain the Treaty of 1677 with an annual tribute ceremony. The Pamunkey tribe was granted federal recognition in 2016. This is the Pamunkey tribe emblem. There's a life-size bronze statue of Kokakowski that was unveiled in Richmond in March of 2021. In her hand is a copy of the treaty she signed. This statue of Kokakowski is part of the Virginia Women's Monument called Voices from the Garden. It's located outside Virginia's state capitol building in Richmond. The monument features 7 bronze statues of significant women in Virginia history, and many others are listed by name on the surrounding wall. This is the statue of Kokakowski right here, to the right. And this is me with the statue of Kokakowski. I included this picture because she's one of my ancestors, my 10th great-grandmother. And now we turn our attention to the Pilgrims of Plymouth Plantation in Massachusetts and the Wampanoag Indians. The Mayflower was a 90-foot-long cargo ship which set out across the Atlantic in September of 1620. Because of delays at the outset of the voyage, the Mayflower crossed the Atlantic at the height of storm season. It was 66 days and nights of rough seas. My husband's ancestor, George Soule, was one of 102 passengers. The number of crew members is estimated to be about 30 men. Among the passengers, 74 were males and 28 were females. 18 of these were servants, and a third of the company were children. The Mayflower arrived in the New World in Cape Cod at the place they call Plymouth in November of 1620. The first winter was a difficult beginning. According to William Bradford, that which was most sad and lamentable was that in 2 or 3 months' time, half of their company died, especially in January and February, being the depth of winter, and wanting houses and other comforts, being infected with scurvy and other diseases, which this long voyage and their inaccommodate condition had brought upon them. So, as there died sometimes 2 or 3 of a day in the foresaid time, that of 100 and odd persons, scarce 50 remained. And of these, in the time of greatest distress, there were but 6 or 7 sound persons, who to their great commendation, be it spoken, spared no pains night or day, but with abundant toil and hazard of their own health, fetched them wood, made them fires, dressed them meat, made their beds, washed their loathsome clothes, clothed and unclothed them. In a word, did all the homely and necessary offices for them, which dainty and queasy stomachs cannot endure to hear named. And all this willingly and cheerfully, without any grudging in the least, showing herein their true love unto their friends and brethren, a rare example and worthy to be remembered. Squanto, or Tisquantum, was a member of the Pawtuxet tribe. He and 20 other Indians had been kidnapped by an English captain and sold into slavery in Spain. Some Dominican priests helped Squanto to escape. After 5 years away, he finally made his way back home, only to find his entire tribe had been wiped out by disease. He went to live among the Wampanoag tribe, and because he was fluent in English, he was introduced to the newly arrived Pilgrims, who considered him a godsend. The Pilgrim governor, William Bradford, wrote, "Squanto was a special instrument of God for our good, beyond any possible expectation. It's likely the Pilgrims would not have survived without his help." A mutually beneficial peace treaty was negotiated between the Wampanoag and the Pilgrims. Each side would deal fairly with the other and come to the aid of the other if they were attacked. This treaty lasted 50 years. The relationship was beneficial to the Indians as well as to the Pilgrims. We often hear about how the Indians taught the Pilgrims to plant corn by burying a fish with the seeds as fertilizer. William Bradford noted, "The Indians in those times did not have nearly so much corn as they have had since the English supplied them with hoes, and set them an example by their industry in preparing new ground therewith." So these were very helpful gardening tools for them that created an abundance of corn. Squanto, however, was guilty of some double dealing as an interpreter. He attempted to deceive both sides into thinking the other might break the treaty and attack them, and that he could prevent this if he was persuaded with gifts. Squanto died a short time later and under suspicious circumstances, which might have been the results of the Indians poisoning him. Oops, there we go. This is a reproduction of the little village that was Plymouth Plantation. The first Thanksgiving is a familiar story, so we'll just touch on it briefly. The only account of this harvest celebration comes from a letter written by Edward Winslow. Of the 50 pilgrims who survived the first winter, only 4 were married women, so the men must have had to help with the cooking. Winslow wrote that there were many Indians coming amongst us, and amongst the rest, their greatest king, Massasoit, with some 90 men. For 3 days, they celebrated with games, competitions, and feasting, but no Black Friday shopping. We draw our talk to a close with a look at a reproduction of George Soul's tiny little 2-story home where he and his wife raised 11 children. And nearby, there's a grave marker where he was laid to rest. One of the values of learning and telling stories of people from the past is to remember and honor those who made good and noble choices, even in difficult circumstances, and to be inspired in how we live our own lives. As one small candle may light 1,000, so the light here kindled hath shone unto many, yea, in some sort to our whole nation. Thank you for your kind attention, and we open the floor to any questions or comments. Squanto, yes. Which part do you want to hear about? The deceptive part or the good guy part?
No, the deceptive.
Okay. One of the things that was written was that he convinced the Indians that the Pilgrims had a plague that they could keep in a box buried in the ground. It's sort of a biological weapon, and that they could release it at any time, but he was going to persuade them not to do that. So that was and the Indians were terrified of this. So that was the kind of deception that was going on. And similarly, he was convincing the Pilgrims that the Indians were, right behind them, going to attack at any moment. So.
Captain, our visiting first Thanksgiving, how much faith
I don't think there's any reason to doubt it. It was just a personal letter that was written by Edward Winslow relating to a friend what had taken place. I think we have made it mythical, built it up in our own culture to what it is today. But I think it was, they had that many of their Native American friends come to dinner, and they threw a really big party. Other comments or questions? Yes.
I'm wondering about the clothing that was on the statues of Pocahontas.
Yes.
When was she kidnapped, and was she always in European clothes? Or?
The statue that you see, that is in Jamestown, and that was put in place, I believe, 1923, in the 1920s. And so it's reflective of what they believe that Pocahontas should look like. There's also a matching statue at Gravesend where she died in England.
And she's in European clothes?
It's supposed to look like Indian clothing. Yeah, but that's from that time period of the early 1920s.
So when was she kidnapped?
She was kidnapped, let's see, it would be about 1614, about that, yeah.
14 or 16?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
I grew up near Jamestown in Virginia. I've been there 3 times, but I've never heard of the massacre.
I know. Yes. This is only recently coming out in the story. Yeah, it's only recently coming out in the telling of the whole tale. My daughter and I went to Jamestown this past summer, and there was someone from the national parks who gave a talk, and he started with the story of Don Luis, which of course I was thrilled with because I had put the pieces together and decided I thought this was my ancestor who was Opachinkano. So it was a great thrill to me to realize that somebody else was telling the story the way that I believe the story should be told. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Other comments over here?
There were 4 roosters on the ship.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
Husband, wife, and 2 kids.
And did they all survive? Do you know? That first winter?
Pardon?
Did all 4 of them survive the first winter?
Yes, and I understand he was head of the government.
Okay, then. Yes, I definitely need to do much more research on that. But that is my husband's line. That's where we get the last name Souls. And so let me just tell you, that is how I first started my interest in learning about family history was because I was homeschooling my children. I said, okay, it's Thanksgiving. Let's look up the Pilgrims. Let's see if there's one person we can sort of identify with. We'll just pick somebody maybe with a last name that starts with an S. And I pull up the list, and it says George Soule. And I'm like, that is really close, really, really close. And so from there, I found out it had gotten lost in their family history. People had forgotten that they were a direct descendant of one of the Pilgrims. Yes? I know. Me too. Yes, yeah. Other comments? Okay, I'm going to turn it back. Oh, yes.
There are a few people in here that are descendants of the Mayflower.
Yes.
Maybe they would tell us.
Yes. Can you raise your hand if you're a descendant of a Mayflower? Yeah, and raise your hand. You're a descendant of the folks on the Mayflower. We're raising our hands for those who are descendants of the Mayflower. Yeah, so there's a few of us. Yes, Pat is a descendant of William Bradford. And these folks are both descendants of the Brewsters. Yes. And are you a descendant as well? There you go. That's good enough. By marriage like me. She's yeah. Yeah. Okay. Shall I turn it back over to you? Thank you, Jean. Okay.
I'd like to make one comment, though. I trace back to 1620, but my wife was in the Spanish Sanchez, and she goes back to 1602. She beat me.
Okay.
Swanto, he came back to talk to me. Well, we enjoyed that, and thank you for coming and celebrating with us. I want to see the hands of those on the Mayflower again. There's 1, 2, you? Who else was descending from the 5 people? How do you find out if you have ancestors?
I would be glad to help anyone who wants to research their ancestors. I'm just an amateur, but I'm a pretty good amateur at this point. I've done a lot of research.
Well, we thank you again, and I'm glad you folks came. Putin is in the news today. Putin has just annexed officially that area of Ukraine that has been where the fighting has been. He hasn't gone in with troops. He said, I hereby declare that that's part of Russia. Now, the next thing is what are they going to do? So it's interesting. Now, unfortunately, it's 2 weeks before we get the expert on Putin and Russia here. You know who that is? Yeah, Jack Jarman, Barbara Booth Jarman's husband, written books on cyber warfare. So the first academy in the next month, March, I believe it's the 6th, will be Jack. Now, what will Jack have to talk about? War or peace or, what's going on? It should be great. We want to fill the room. The last time Jack talked, we had 100 people. Yeah. Well, anyway, thank you a lot for